Azure DNS. See, whenever we want to work with a network, the identification of a machine is always a IP address. It's the IP address with which we are going to refer to a machine, virtual machine, physical machine, any kind of machine, it's IP address always. Now remembering IP address is going to be impossible because they are numbers. If you want to remember this number, it's going to be very difficult. It's like a human being given a number and we are calling them by their numbers. No, that's not possible for somebody like human beings. Machines to machine, okay. But we people want a name. So the name to IP address mapping is always done via a DNS server. So what is the job of the DNS server? Simple. It is the one which will give you for this particular name, this is the IP address. So whenever I go and type, let us say www.best.nettraining.com. Now, can somebody reach best.net training by its name? No. So the browser is going to send a request to the DNS server. And in response, we are going to get the IP address of the best.nettraining.com. And then on my machine, a socket will be created using the local IP address of my machine and some random port number. And a request is sent to the IP address of best.net training and port number 80. Yeah, if I give here some other port number, a request would be sent to that port number. But when we don't give any port number, by default, remember it's 80. Remember that. So yes, we are using name. Internally from the name, browser is getting IP. From where? The DNS. So go to DNS server. Go to command prompt and type here ipconfig/all, whichever network you are using. For that network, there will be a DNS server assigned. So my requests are always routed to that DNS server. And that DNS server, we will search first if there is an entry, name mapped to IP or not. And if the name is not there in that, it will go to its parent DNS server. So like that, every DNS server has an authoritative parent DNS server where it will search for an entry. But if it is not found anywhere, then it is going to go at the top level to something called as root name server. So you see, from my machine, imagine I start browsing something like www.microsoft.com. So my machine has pre-configured DNS server. Imagine this is the one which is in my private network. Using private IP, I would reach there. But the entry is not found here. So it goes to its parent, its parent, its parent. Eventually, it goes to the root name server. Now what root name server does? Based on your domain, basically .com, .edu, these are all domains. All these are top level domains. So this is root. For each of these top level domains, there is a dedicated name server. This is root name server. Then .com has one name server. So mine is what? Microsoft.com. So a request is forwarded to .com name server. And then from .com name server, this will forward the request to Microsoft.com name server. That means for every domain name which we purchase, there is a name server configured. So Contoso.com will have one name server. Adatum.com may have another name server, or probably the same name server. Fabricam.com will have one name server. So how it actually works is, imagine I go to GoDaddy and buy a domain. From GoDaddy, I buy a domain name. GoDaddy is going to provide me with a name server for my domain name. Let's say I buy a domain name abcd.com. So GoDaddy is going to provide me a name server for abcd.com. So I go to the control panel of abcd.com. From there, I use the option manage name server or manage DNS actually. When I say manage DNS, it will show me these are the name servers. Now when we manage DNS, what we do? In DNS server, we will create record sets. In DNS server, which is name server, we will create a record set. www.abcd.com is mapped to this particular IP address. We will give a proper IP address. So these type of record sets are created. Let me do one thing. Let's say I go to godaddy.com. So here I logged into my GoDaddy account, and then let's say I go to a particular domain, any domain which I have purchased from GoDaddy. Let's say bestcpptraining.com. I go to its DNS, and here we will see name server. So right now it is using the default name server which is provided by GoDaddy, and because it is using the default name server provided by GoDaddy, here we are going to find all these as CNAME records, text records. All these are called as record sets which are created in a DNS server. So very simply understand that every domain which we purchase, we are going to have a control panel where we are going to create record sets. Now these record sets are of different formats. We have got A records or AAA records, 4A's record or A record. Now in this, we are going to map a domain name to an IP address. Direct domain name will be mapped to an IP address when we create an AAA record. But there is a CNAME record which can create, that is mapped to an alias. We create an alias with CNAME record. MX record is for exchange. NS record is for name server itself. So state of authority, these are all not very commonly used. S text record. This is most of the time used for human verification. So what is this? Go to GoDaddy, and here you are supposed to create a record. Like I already see an A record here. So click on this edit. @ that means anybody typing just bestcpptraining.com would be automatically sent to a particular, okay, this is points to parked. So this actually can be some IP address of some machine on the network, anything. You should first figure out the IP address. So once you have this, imagine I do this 121.34.3.6 or 3.8. Now if somebody is doing ping bestcpptraining.com, they are supposed to get that IP address. It will take some time. It is not going to reflect immediately. Around 24 hours it would take sometimes to reflect something like this. So right now it was parked at GoDaddy address. So it is right now giving me some random GoDaddy address. But the purpose is that only. So whenever we host a website on a web server, for a domain name, we have to map to its IP address of that web server machine. And this is how we do it. So let me clarify once again the whole story here. Suppose you want to host a website. What is that you are going to do? You will buy a domain name from somebody like GoDaddy. GoDaddy will give you a DNS panel, control panel, where domain names can be mapped to either IP address or another domain name. Aliases can be created. And eventually every name should end up with IP address, because alias again will have a, suppose I have, let's say, www.abcd.com mapped to xyz.com. xyz somewhere will eventually evaluate to the IP address. Every name eventually should evaluate to an IP address. That is a fixed thing. So let's say you type now best.net training in browser. What will browser do? Browser will send the request to DNS server which is configured on your machine, and it will try to find out what is the IP address of this domain name. Now once it has an IP address, the IP address will be used to create a request, and that request will be sent to, okay, this is this story. Okay, so how does it figure out the IP address? So best.nettraining.com instead of microsoft.com goes to your DNS server. Your DNS server will route to root will send to .com. .com will send to name server of microsoft.com here, and name server of microsoft.com is exactly like this. This is the configuration in name server of microsoft.com. So, and that will return the IP, and that IP would be used to connect to this machine. The application which is running here would listen to the request on a particular port number. Like if it is web server, it's listening on a port number 80, and local socket, remote socket, connection between them, data transfer will happen. So two things you have to understand here. There are two different angles to look at this. One is from the end user angle, where each one of them have their own DNS server. So if you are visiting my website, your DNS server will be used. If I am visiting a site, another DNS server which will be used is configured in my network. So everybody has one DNS server configured in their network. This is from end user point of view. Now if I am hosting the website, is it not my responsibility to create all these things? Wherever needed, I need to map a domain name to its IP, and that is purely my responsibility. So that I am going to do here. Now coming to Azure, by default in a virtual network, definitely there is a Azure DNS pre-configured. So if you go to, let's say, the portal, go to virtual network, and in virtual network we will see DNS server. So like in our network we have one DNS server. In virtual network also there is a default Azure provided DNS server. At some later point of time I am going to teach you how we can create a virtual machine inside the virtual network, install DNS service on top of it, and use that server as the DNS server rather than the Azure provided one. That means we are going to create a setup where we will do domain name to IP mapping for our organization. Something like this kind of stuff. This DNS server I am asking, we will provision in our network. But Azure already has one if you don't want to create your own server, and that's what is used by default for all the virtual machines to communicate with each other by their names. I want to go one step ahead of it. I want to have now domain name, let's say best CPP training itself, to be managed from Azure itself. I don't want to come here and manage it. It's too much, right? I have to keep track of this username and password, which is my portal username and password, and I have to also keep track of the GoDaddy username and password for doing a DNS management. Now can we bring this facility within our portal account itself? Yes. That is where we will create something called as DNS zone. We'll create a DNS zone. So I now create a DNS zone. This is the main topic we are discussing now. Rest all is for your knowledge I gave, but the main topic is DNS zone. So I will give my DNS zone as the domain name which I have purchased from GoDaddy, bestcpptraining.com. Go to next and create it. But this DNS zone is not going to be used unless GoDaddy will be configured to use this as the DNS configuration rather than the default one. Go to the service. So bestcpptraining.com has its own name server. What I have to do now? Go to GoDaddy from where I purchased this and tell GoDaddy I am no more interested in your DNS. I want to use my own DNS. So I should request for a change. Here I have to enter. So these values one by one I'll paste here. All the 4. Save it. Now what GoDaddy did? GoDaddy now knows that the DNS server is no more managed by GoDaddy. For any kind of DNS query for my domain name, it will be sent to this name server. Very clearly understand. If the .com name server is sending a request, it will now send a request to these name servers, and these name servers are now configured through our DNS zone which we created here. So here I am going to create a record set. I'll say www.bestcpptraining.com is mapped to this IP address. Something randomly I gave. Right now that is irrelevant, but I created a record here. Like this, here only we can create a CNAME record also. Let's say training dot, and I do an alias CNAME record to something else, www.cpptraining.com. So like this we have to create records here. One by one all the records have to be created here. Now after around 24 hours, that is the worst case scenario, we will be able to go here and do ping www.bestcpptraining, and we should get the IP address which we gave. Right now it's not coming. See, right now it is giving the IP which was configured sometime back in GoDaddy. GoDaddy IP is reflecting. Earlier it was this IP. Then I changed in GoDaddy the IP address of www.bestcpptraining.com. That is coming. At least this has reflected pretty fast. But the name server itself we have changed this time. Change in name server has to be cascaded across the globe. And definitely that is going to take a lot more time when compared to simply a new record created in the record set. A new record created here. This will reflect faster. But the name server change are going to definitely take a lot of time. So this is how DNS zone can be used within your network, within your virtual network. Rather, we have not even used this in the virtual network. This is a general topic. I just created DNS zone, and in DNS zone, we are going to create records for a particular domain. Whatever domain you have owned, for that domain only you are creating records. This is the purpose of DNS zone. So understand there are two different angles. I am repeating this point. One is the DNS server which is there in the network where my machine is, and my machine is always going to send a request to that DNS server for any kind of domain name to IP address query. This is for the end users, but the person who is hosting the website, he will have to buy a domain name and create record sets. DNS records has to be created. Can be a record or can be CNAME record, and these records are created in the name server. By default, the domain name registrar is going to provide you a name server and a control panel where the record sets can be created, like GoDaddy did. But what we can do, instead of every time coming here and trying to manage, we can go to portal. In portal, create a DNS zone, and for that DNS zone, we are going to get some name server names. We should copy these names and replace the default names in GoDaddy or any other registrar. And then all the records should eventually get created here. After a while, roughly around 24 hours, all the requests for domain name to IP mapping for this particular domain are going to be forwarded to this database. So this is the significance of DNS zone. So if you have 10 domains, 10 zones you will have to configure here very clearly. 10 zones, 10 domains. Now, this is one option, which is public DNS zone. There is one more service which is called as private DNS zone. This is important. We have got private DNS zones. So I now create a private DNS zone which I want to use it for my organization only, not for public. The DNS zone which we created earlier, that is for public. Public domain names mapping to public IP addresses. But now we are talking about a domain name which I would like to create for my own purpose only. So let's say I create a domain name sandeepsoni.local. Imagine. So they are saying some not recommended. Okay, we'll use .com. Local is used internally for something. So I'm creating sandeepsoni. As you imagine. This is the name I'm creating. Domain name is what is this now. You can link virtual network to this private DNS zone after the zone has been created. We are going to link this DNS zone which we are creating now to a virtual network. So this is going to take time to load. In the meantime, in another tab, let's say I open portal and I will go to virtual machines. I want to do an RDP to this virtual machine. It's right now stopped. Let us start. And from this virtual machine, I'm going to browse the website which is in DemoVM. Here I have enabled IIS. Here I have not enabled IIS. So from this machine I should browse a website which is here. Just confirm that. By default the machine are accessible from here to here. Yeah, it will be because we did create a rule earlier. Outbound rule. Okay, looks like we already deleted. So good enough. No, not for that. For DemoVM, we created outbound rule. But this is for DemoVM outbound rule. We are interested in database VM outbound rule. And we don't have anything. By default, everything is accessible within the VNet. Good enough. So from this machine, I will definitely be able to reach this machine. You can also verify that using Network Watcher IP flow. Anyways, hopefully the virtual machine has started. Let's connect and we can use Bastion again. So right now, how are we going to reach demo VM? To reach demo VM, I have only one option at this point of time. It's private IP address. Demo VM, private IP address is what we have to use. This one. 192.168.1.4. So here I open browser. But before that, let's enable proper browsing here. For that, this is a server machine, right? By default, enhanced security configuration is enabled. If you want to do browsing from this machine, you should always disable that. On production machines, don't do that. So now if I put IP address, it will work. It's working, fantastic. But I want domain name. I don't want IP address. And I want domain name in the format which we just now created. A private DNS zone. sandeepsoni.azure I want to use now within my organization. So go to this private DNS zone and add here a virtual network links. You have to add your virtual networks here. You can add definitely multiple virtual networks. So demo VNet, that's what is our name of VNet. Let's give it as demo East, same name preferably, so that we have consistency. And then you can enable this, enable auto registration. Now what enable auto registration will do? Automatically it will find out all the virtual machines which are started, which are running in this particular virtual network. It will find their IP, and for them, based on the domain name, based on the machine name, a domain name will be created. This is going to take a couple of minutes to register the virtual network. After the virtual network is created, I just need to take you to overview, and here we will see demo-vm.sandeepsoni.azure demo, and then other is database-vm.sandeepsoni.azure mapped to their respective IP address. That is because of the checkbox which I checked. It is because of that thing would happen here. And we will see the virtual network link is also present here after some time when this task is completed. You see, this has come. Auto registration is enabled. So as soon as a new virtual machine is provisioned, automatically whatever is the private IP of it, that will get registered in this with a name. Not yet. This has to complete. Now it has demo-vm mapped to its private IP address. So full name will be what? demo-vm.sandeepsoni.azure. Copy this domain name and put it here. You will still get the same response. Fantastic. Earlier we were browsing through IP, now we are browsing through name. Now, important thing. The domain name registration which we have done is a private DNS zone. It is only accessible from the virtual networks, virtual machines which are connected to this particular domain name. So if you have 10 virtual networks, you'll have to put all 10 virtual networks over here. And only then from the virtual networks we would be able to use the name mapping to IP. Be careful about it. And generally, yeah, it's completely local. It's absolutely, this is not going to work from my machine. From my machine, if I type demo-vm.sandeepsoni.azure, where will it go? It will go to my DNS server. My DNS server will never be able to see this private DNS zone. Yes, it will be able to see the public DNS zone, but not the private DNS zone. Very, very important. So for public, use public DNS zone. For a private network within the organization, where the domain names should map to the private IP address, we should use private DNS zones. So this is what is the DNS zone topic. All the steps are given here. How you should copy the domain. This name server concept will come when? The name server concept is only going to come in context of public. Definitely it is not going to come in context of private. In private, it's a simple. Create a DNS, create a new DNS zone, private DNS zone for a given domain name and start immediately using it. Nothing else you have to do. Of course, minimum requirement is virtual network links have to be created. So this is all about DNS zone.